Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think you put together, Ken, with your usual diligence and perseverance, on a very great panel. And I think that we're going to hear from you first, Congressman, because I gather that you have a very heavy schedule today.
So let me begin by saying that as we look at the steps that we might take in the Middle East in order to help stabilize the Middle East, it seems to me that the action that would be most productive would be one which maybe wasn't confrontational, but could change the attitudes inside Iran. We know what worked during the Cold War with respect to broadcasts into Eastern Europe. I was on an exchange program in East Germany at the time in the 1980s. And there is strong support in the Persian community for legislation which would broadcast into Iran the same type of messaging. Why? Because the Gallup polling organization tells us that 2/3 of Iranians want a Western-style democracy without a theocracy. And that second point is one that's really stressed when you look at the crosstabs in the poll. So should we be able to, on social media, and on radio and television, replicate what we've done in the past, we should be very effective. This has been encouraged by virtually anyone who has left Iran who has an interest in changing the dynamics on the ground. If it's 67% opposition right now in the polling, we could clearly drive that number up to 84%. We have legislation, myself and Elliot Engel. We have the one committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, that works in a bipartisan way. The one thing that I've made sure of since I took the gavel is that Republicans and Democrats travel together. We try to speak with one voice on foreign policy. As Elliot would share, there's not this much difference between the two of us in terms of foreign affairs issues. And this legislation, which we've passed through the House, is now in the Senate. It's my hope that we can have it enacted into law. That is one bill that I think would be very important.
And that's to broadcast into Iran via?
It's actually to reform the Broadcasting Board of Governors and put a CEO in charge and begin to replicate what worked back in the 80s.
In the Cold War.
That was so effective in terms of changing people's attitudes. The second point is one that we've already taken, and that is as regards Hezbollah. Iran has been transferring to Hezbollah an enormous inventory of weaponry, but especially concerning is the 100,000 rockets and missiles that are now in the inventory. In 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, I was in Haifa, and those rockets rained down every day. There were 600 victims in the trauma hospital. Clearly, if we had been more effective, if the international community could have prevented Iran from obtaining those weapons, Israel would have been far more secure, and so would the region, right? Now we're in a situation where the Iranians are boasting that they can transfer GPS capability to those rockets and missiles so that they can hit individual targets, individual buildings. This would be beyond the capacity of the current shield that Israel has developed through Iron Dome and the Arrow and other systems. So we need to do two things here. One, in the Memorandum of Understanding, we have to boost the capacity of Israel with a full system of anti-ballistic missile defense. We have to also assist Israel in that agreement with hardening their infrastructure. We must also put something else into the funding, and that is tunnel detection, because the tunnels which were there then in 2006 have been vastly expanded. But on top of all of this, and we can do this in the MOU, and we've put it in the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a must-sign bill to make certain that our view of the MOU is enacted. We have put this into the National Defense Authorization Act. I'm a conferee on that committee, and we intend, Democrats and Republicans, to keep that in the bill and send it to the President's desk. Our hope is he signs it, but what we're trying to do is get enough enthusiasm and support to really drive this point on the MOU. The other thing we did, Elliot Engel and I took language that would sanction Iran. Now, this is the first, sanction Iran if it transfers this capability and other capability, further capability, into Hezbollah. This was an act which we felt was important because we thought we had an agreement or an understanding during the negotiations that there was going to be no arms transfers for a period of 5 years and no ballistic missile development in Iran for a period of 8 years. We did not know that this would be undone at the UN Security Council, and by so doing, provide an avenue for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to transfer additional capability into the hands of Hezbollah. So enforcement becomes the next big issue. We passed legislation on these sanctions, the Hezbollah financing act. We had supermajorities in both the House and Senate, and therefore the President signed this last December. Now our action on the committee turns to enforcement, turns to the enforcement to make certain that on this issue we are successful in isolating the capability of the IRGC to transfer into the hands of Hezbollah this next capability. Myself and Elliot Engel were in the tunnels after the conflict in Gaza, and as a matter of fact, we passed a resolution of solidarity with Israel afterwards because the particular tunnel we were in came up underneath an elementary school. And it was clear to us that the goal, as we pointed out on CNN, the goal was to take hostages from that elementary school and take them back into Gaza and force the IDF to fight block by block. This is the reason why we also have to transfer and fund a new generation of technology that will allow us the capability of shutting down the tunnel network that's also on the Hezbollah border or the Lebanon border. So I'll now add another component of what I think are steps that the United States needs to take now and enforcement actions that we need to do right now. And that goes to the issue of incitement. When Elliot Engel and I and a bipartisan delegation were last meeting with President Abbas, we raised an issue which I think was very important. 6 weeks prior, on the Iranian-owned television station, President Abbas had denied the existence of the Holocaust, but he had, in addition to this, used this language of incitement against the Jewish people. And it's this issue of shutting down incitement, using the considerable leverage that the United States has to force the Palestinian Authority and frankly the UN to switch out the old textbooks and to switch out the language of hatred that is used to radicalize. And many of you have seen in the last month some of the additional language. I will just share what the conversation I had with President Abbas. I had photographs my father had taken at Dachau, when Dachau was liberated. He was with Patton's Third Army, and he was a forward observer. So he had a camera with him, and he had taken these photographs, and I handed them to Prime Minister, to the head of state, President Abbas, and I said, 6 weeks ago, you denied that this has occurred. These are photographs of what happened in the Holocaust. Is that still your position? And he said, well, regardless of what happened then, it's no excuse for what's happening today to the Palestinian people today. And I said, well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. Because the reality is that this language that you used in your broadcast is very similar to the language used in the 1930s. The Holocaust didn't just happen. Something was done to create that incitement. And if your goal and our goal is coexistence between the Jewish and Palestinian people, how could you possibly replicate that kind of incitement? That kind of incitement has to end. And then I looked over his shoulder at the map behind him, and I asked him, where's Israel on your map? And he says, where's your map? Show me your map. The discussion that I and Elliot Engel, Nita Lowey was there, Ted Deutsch was there, that discussion I thought was a very productive one, because we got down to a discussion about ending incitement. But when we left, our special envoy said to me, our discussions usually don't go that way. And I said, why not? If the discussions don't go that way, if we're not pushing back, if we're in a position where we're allowing other voices in the Palestinian Authority, including some that have carried the opposite message, have carried a message of coexistence, if we're not supporting, if we're not working to counter the narrative that is being spread, which is one of violence and incitement, then we are not playing the role that the United States should be playing in terms of bringing peace and reconciliation. At this point, it becomes doubly important that we make certain that on the enforcement end of these laws that we have, we will also, by the way, since turning back to the issue of Iran, Iran is the number one, shall we call it, state sponsor of terrorism, and the number one concern for the international financial community in terms of being a primary money laundering concern. I'll just share with you why. It is because the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, in the view of the Treasury Department of the United States, is the primary money laundering concern worldwide. It's the primary force also, they say, in the economy in Iran, because that institution nationalized most of the economy. Very important, therefore, that we not give access to the US dollar. That was not part of the agreement. The Treasury Secretary explained that. So did the White House. Now is not the time to give Iran access to the US dollar or the US banking system. They can get that access. All they have to do is reform. That's not part of the agreement. So if they want the access, then reform the practice. Convince the international financial institutions that you're coming aboard with transparency, with an honest banking system, and you're not going to fund terror. That's all that's necessary for Iran to get an additional, to take that additional step. But I can't see us backing down now after Congress has taken a position, and so has the Treasury Department, that they're not going to have access to the US dollar. Because, and I'll share with you why. The Iranian economy is in a shambles. We should not be in the position of sacrificing to prop it up. If it's not in the agreement, that's not an additional carrot we should give, because they've already violated basically the administration is saying they didn't violate the terms of the agreement. Well, they certainly violated the spirit of the agreement, right? Let's all agree on that. They have violated the spirit of this agreement in the sense that there was no expectation that they'd be doing ballistic missile tests with the wording in Hebrew and in Farsi on the side, in case anybody missed it. Israel must be destroyed. Who had the expectation that after this agreement, the Iranian Ayatollah would tell his generals it's the responsibility of every officer to try to figure out how to mass produce intercontinental ballistic missiles? And the last point I think I would make here is that when we're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles, the key word here is intercontinental, as in from there to here. When he says, as he did a few weeks ago, death to the little Satan, that's a direct threat to Israel. But when he follows up with death to the great Satan, that's a threat to the United States. Who thought that after this agreement was done, that we'd have that kind of rhetoric, this kind of a ballistic missiles program, and to boot, that we'd see the overthrow of the allied government of the United States in Yemen, or that we'd see the Quds forces at work in Bahrain, trying to overthrow that government, or their work to undermine Azerbaijan, etc. So in this kind of environment, we don't need more backing down. We need more backbone. And that means enforcement, and that means no more rolling over when Iran attempts other aggressive actions. It means an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with Israel that fully supports ballistic missiles. It means the United States preventing the transfer, of that GPS capability from Iran to Hezbollah. We should be helping Israel in this regard. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, okay, thanks, Congressman. I'd like to ask the Congressman, Malcolm, Richard, and Steve how you see the memorandum of understanding that's being negotiated between the administration and Israel right now. I know some people are saying that it should have been negotiated last summer when the Iran deal was there. Some people are saying that Israel should hold out for better terms, and some people are saying it should be signed now. And as I understand it, it requires that Israel buy U.S. weapons instead of developing Israeli weapons, or instead of buying its own weapons or investing in its own weapons.
Look, it's a complex issue with the MOU, but I think the terms have been agreed upon. It will involve phasing out of the foreign sources, and meaning that Israel, till now, was allowed to take 26% of the money to spend on its domestic purchases, which kept its own production, advancement of engineering, technology alive. It will, instead of an immediate cutoff, I think it'll be phased in after 5 or 6 years, which resolves one problem. Another question was whether the supplemental from Congress that they make each year for the missile defense program will be incorporated into the annual allocation.
Because it was a separate bill, right?
It was
for our
already a
audience?
separate bill,
exactly.
Beyond the $3 billion. So this way it'll be added in. So when you look now at the new total, it's really not such a big increase. It's really with the incorporation of that money. But the administration insisted that there be no supplemental additional money by Congress. And that is still a sticking point, because what happens if, God forbid, there's a war or some emergency situation?
So I heard a big shot Democrat said Israel should hold out and hope for a better deal from the next administration. What do you say?
You can't hold out because you don't know what the next administration is going to be, and you don't know whether you'll have people chairing key committees who may be different from what we have today. You're better off, and the Army needs the assurance. They need to plan now, because this won't come into effect till 2017, but they need to be able to look long-term, and therefore having the assurance they have this amount of money, they know how then to work around it. The hang-up right now is between Lindsey Graham and Susan Rice, and hopefully that will be worked out. it's over certain aspects and issues, and especially about the congressional support. And you know, traditionally, Congress, with every president, Republican, Democrat, has been the bedrock of support. And having somebody like Ed Royce sitting in the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee is really a blessing to our community, to America, and we should all appreciate who he is and what he has done. He's really a great leader.
Okay, you were good, Malcolm. Short, interesting.
Very quickly. There's an aspect of this that is penny wise and pound foolish, and that concerns the fact that Israel is able to develop defense systems for pennies on the dollar. And so let's just look at the Iron Dome. There was no consensus here in the United States that that could even be developed. That concept of hitting a bullet with a bullet, it wasn't on the drawing board. When it was developed, it literally was developed at about 10% of the cost that it would have cost to us in the United States. So the reason this is still under negotiation is that there are many of us who feel that this is a much better position, and when Israel then develops it, it can supply it very inexpensively to other allies like South Korea, who are and the United States, who are increasingly dependent upon this edge that Israel has in technological development. So what we don't want to see is to discourage this kind of innovation.
I sit on 8 or 9 Israeli for-profit boards, 7 of which are involved in producing staggering medical technologies that would revolutionize important aspects of medicine. And it really, it's something to behold. I've, in the last year, seen 4 products to either get approved by the FDA or come close to approval by the FDA, and I expect it soon, that have been developed with less than $5 million of investor money in each case. And I've sat on a lot of American boards of similar sort, and the time frame and the money spent is amazing. And I'm really talking about products, I won't detail them, that are just amazingly important for people who suffer various kinds of conditions and diseases.
Okay, Steve. I know that many in the Jewish community and some in Israel are anxious about what the administration may do after the election. Will they impose a settlement? The Prime Minister is said to be anxious about this. Are you anxious about this? Do you know people are anxious? Or are you relaxed? How do you feel about it?
So the answer to your question is we're concerned about what will happen after November and before January, because we have heard the president actually say, he said it to us, that while he knows and he feels personally diminished that there won't be a so-called two-state solution, that he would like to lay the groundwork for his successor. Now, whatever that means, hopefully it doesn't mean there'll be some resolution at the United Nations, which we worry about. Some of us at this table last week met with the Secretary of General and raised that very issue, and we're hopeful that nothing will happen. But certainly you raise an issue that's of great concern, and that is what signals, if any, will be sent, some of which would do nothing but diminish the possibility that everybody wants of a two-state solution. But let me just, I have to say one quick thing before. First of all, for me, to be on a panel with my colleagues and friends, Kenny and Richard and Malcolm is great, but I want to say one other thing about the congressman. If you listen to what he said, he and Elliot Engel, a Republican, a Democrat, are joined at the hip. They do things perhaps in a way we would like to see more members of Congress work, and that is do things in a bipartisan way. And I want to personally tell him how we all admire him for that and thank him for his good work.
Okay, so Congressman, I would like to ask you the same question, although of course you're a United States Congressman. What, do you have any apprehensions about what the administration may do in regard to Israel in imposing a peace in the lame duck session?
Lally, I've suggested that whatever's done in this context not be done at the United Nations, because we've got the evidence in terms of how that would remove us from a situation where Israelis and Palestinians would be able to sit down together and work on the future. Instead, that becomes just an adversarial environment. There has never been, based on my experience going up to the United Nations, any fairness. It's an anti-Semitism that you see at the UN. So to open that Pandora's box at the United Nations, or to allow that to be adjudicated there, would be not in the interest of stability and peace and the future of either the Palestinian or Israeli people.
Well, I assume that the administration's not sharing its plans with you, but do you have any instincts about this or
No,
not?
I've talked to our ambassadors. I've talked to Samantha about it. I've talked to those in the administration. They know my views, and they know the views of Elliot Engel and the members of my committee. And so we think this would be a blunder.
Are you worried?
We also, yes, I'm worried, but I get paid to worry, so I do it all the time. We met with Samantha Power, we met with Ban Ki-moon, we've met with others, we've met with people in the administration, and I don't think they themselves know yet what the decision is going to be. The danger is that the Palestinians are going to move a resolution on settlements, and they will use the language of the administration in an attempt to make it impossible or hard for them to veto. The effort now is to get this all postponed till after the November election, because nobody wants to put the candidates, and particularly one, in a difficult position vis-a-vis the administration. So the impetus now is to try and move everything beyond November, when we could have a number of choices: a resolution on settlements, a speech by the president on parameters, a resolution on parameters, so it becomes the Obama and not the Clinton parameters, for historic reasons, because legacy is critical to this president. And the question is how the breakdown in the UN will be, because as the Congressman rightly pointed out, we are seeing the unlimited bias in the institutions, every single institution of the UN, from the status of women, the World Health Organization. Everyone condemns one country, the one that is the least culpable of all of them. And you see Iran, Venezuela, Syria, Iraq sitting in judgment on the Human Rights Council of Israel's human rights policies. So these great paragons of human rights are sitting in judgment. And right now, the new Security Council that will come in is going to be worse than the one we have. And you need 9 affirmative votes to avoid a veto. The United States does not want to have to exercise the veto. I believe that is a view they hold. So there are 3 things going on. One is the French initiative, which will go nowhere. They will play it out. There will be a meeting, a ministerial likely. They will try to get a summit meeting before the end of the year. I do not believe that that will happen. You have the Sisi initiative, which the Israelis back and which has some possibilities. The Arab states back it, and as you know, relations with all Arab countries, when we meet them, they don't raise the Palestinian issues. They don't care about it. When we raise it, they look at us and say, what are you talking about? For them, Israel has become a very different entity than what it was, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. So the dynamics internally are very different than what they were. I think, though, that we run the risk of something happening that could have longer-term consequences. Any intervention that obviates direct negotiations, which is what Abbas wants, he will never negotiate. He has no interest in it. He would have to make concessions. He's not prepared to do it. He's 81 years old. He just wants to live out. He's in the 7th year of his 4-year term. He does not want to have the elections that are scheduled for October. I don't believe they will take place. They're now Fatah and they are fighting, but there's much more internal dissension. All of those will play a role in whether they will be in a position to actually introduce a resolution. If they do, it will force America to make a choice. And there, we again turn to our friends in Congress, to people around the country, to make their voices heard.
And one has to worry if that choice is deferred, which it likely will be. We could anticipate the possibility of a much less favorable Congress going into the next 2-year period, to say the least.
Understatement of the 20th century. So, Congressman, how do you see the situation today in Syria and in Iraq, but Syria particularly, I would say? Do you, reportedly from the newspapers, there's progress in Iraq, in Syria, although it's complicated by the Turkish incursion into Syria. And it looks like Raqqa is about to fall in a few weeks, I believe, which is, of course, as you know, the capital of ISIS, which would be really a good thing for the world. And I guess the bottom line question is, does Mr. Assad stay? Does he go? Erdogan's been to Russia, I don't need to tell you. It's a very complicated situation.
I think very quickly here that, and I was just up on the border, the Syrian border.
Oh, you
in
were?
both Jordan and up
Very
in
jealous.
Erbil.
Wow.
With the Kurdish units there that we're training. I have to say that with respect to a no-fly zone, this would have been a big part of the solution in both the northern sector and the southern. It's been
Explain. It was
so
in
a safe
2012.
zone, a no-fly zone is one that would protect the Sunni, or would have protected the Sunni population across the northern border.
And it was proposed in about
and
2012, right?
It was, and Elliot Engel took the lead in proposing it, and I supported him. And the concept of the no-fly zone, or the safe zone that we have pushed, is that it would then give protection from the bombing, both the chemical weapons that are dropped and the other ordnance that have hit this area. And unfortunately, in not making a decision, we allowed the Air Force, the Syrian Air Force, to begin to hit markets, as you know, begin to hit schools, hospitals. And as this becomes increasingly brutal, you have a flood of Sunnis out of the northern part. They're the majority of the population. You have this flood of people into Turkey, into Lebanon, into Jordan. So you have 12 million displaced people. And likewise in the south, you have the same situation. So we should have done this. This would have foreclosed the option of not just the Air Force from Damascus using this, but the Russian Air Force coming into this space and hitting civilian targets. Because the more you do the ethnic cleansing, the more of a crisis it is for the whole region, certainly for Europe, because you have 1 million Sunnis, depart for Europe. So that is the point in terms of helping to stabilize that. We need to do that. We've been urged to do it by our other partners in the region. Second, with respect to ISIS, briefly here, we had an opportunity when ISIS was coming out of Raqqa, and the Pentagon, certainly us in the committee, urged that ISIS be hit with U.S. air power before they began taking these cities, like Fallujah, all the way up to Mosul. And city by city, for 8 months, we went without the use of any U.S. air power. It culminated with the fall of Mosul, which meant ISIS got its hands on $750 million, but more importantly, created the perception that they couldn't be rolled back. The perception that they were on the march, that fate was with them, that young men should rally. And it gave them the opportunity in these setting up these training centers to develop these bomb-making skills and export that skill. So now we're in the position where it's not just Raqqa. There are now 6,500 being trained in Libya, and they're in Somalia, etc. So it's sort of now spread. And I would say our first order of business should be to take ISIS down as soon as we can and to figure out ways on the internet to develop, I think this is in the works, programming, and Israel's very good at this too, by the way, programming that would allow ISIS websites to be taken down instantaneously rather than to have to find them.
Great.
When you're looking through 1 billion posts, it's hard to find them, and in the meantime, they're able to recruit more. We want to shut off their capacity to recruit. We've had testimony before our committee on this, and we need to be working with Palo Alto and, frankly, with Tel Aviv in bringing this to market quickly.
That's a great idea. But I think I heard that since San Bernardino, the president stepped it up in Iraq, and things are going better with the U.S. troops. Is that correct?
Well, in terms of getting to Raqqa, it's slow, but it's slow progress. It beats no progress. But when we're done there, we're then going to have to face what we do about Libya, Somalia, and the other places where they've now spread their capabilities. So yeah, slow progress.
There's some progress, though, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think you have to look at these in the larger context of the whole Middle East. And if one looks at Iraq today, we've lost Iraq to Iran. They just uncovered on Friday 6 training camps of the IRGC near Kirkuk. They boast that for the first time in history, Iran, which is not Arab, controls 4 Arab capitals: Baghdad, Sana'a in Yemen, Beirut, and Damascus. They have successfully spread their influence, and that's why, as the Congressman, Iran is the fundamental issue in the Middle East. All of these things could be changed if we would deal with Iran. And the fact that they can they can harass our destroyers to go after a U.S. aircraft carrier group in international waters, in the Persian Gulf, and get away with it. No sanction, no hit. We didn't do anything. The message to the whole Middle East is that we are a paper tiger. We can have all the power in the world if you don't exercise it. It's the perception that counts, not the reality. That shapes the reality. And the perception today is that the West doesn't care, has no determination, no will. It's the language that Osama bin Laden used, Khania used, and others. So when you look at Syria today, Syria is a failed state. Libya is a failed state. They were created by the colonials. Egypt is a real country. That's why their army could keep them together. And what we're seeing today is the battle of four empires. The Ottomans, Turkey wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. Iran wants to recreate the Persian Empire. The Wahhabis want to create an empire. The Muslim Brotherhood succeeded in doing it, but thank God it's collapsing. And you have now the ISIS empire. But you can't look at the Middle East. This is not about a battle of democracy. This is about the Sunni-Shiite war of 1,000 years standing. If you don't see that, it's a battle for hegemony, and it's not just in the region, it's a global hegemony that they seek. And each of these moves, Syria is like an onion. You can peel one layer. It's Sunni-Shiite, it's Kurds, it's Huranis, it's Christians, it's Alawites. It's not a country that people identify as Syrians, and so you have at least 120 rebel groups. You have so many people fighting each other that you can't even say that we can resolve any one problem. Today, ISIS is recruiting 5,000 people a month still. They have 30,000 recruits according to those secret documents that were found in a raid 2 weeks ago. So all of this, the notions that today they are operating in at least 20 countries, ISIS. And the name change from ISIS to ISIL, all of these are significant because it shows the change from originally being ISIS and Islamic State in Iraq, then it became Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, which covers the whole area. Then it becomes the Islamic State because it covers everywhere.
I would make something slightly more specific, building on what both Malcolm and the Congressman have said. The emphasis throughout the world on demolishing ISIS is certainly correct, but I'd like to ask the Congressman, what comes next? How do you ensure that the demolition of ISIS doesn't play into the hands of the Iranians, for example? Don't you have to plan what's going to fill the vacuum when ISIS is defeated?
But let me say to the panel, and Lally, I very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I'm going to answer that question, but then I do have to make the call to the Secretary of State, so I will have to leave. This goes to the issue that I began this discussion with, which was looking at the attitudes in the Middle East. Where is there a population that really is done with theocracy, that frankly felt it's imposed upon them? And the answer to that primarily is with the Persian or the people of Iran's viewpoint. They've had it. If we had if the tilt to Iran had been the tilt to the people in Iran when they were protesting their stolen election, if it had been to use social media and the internet and radio to give power to those voices who felt that their culture was being destroyed by this Ayatollah, and that's the attitude of most Iranians that we speak to, then we'd be in a different situation. So what I'm sharing with everyone is that the counterweight in Iran should be a government representative of the people there, and the way to get there is probably the same thing that worked in Poland, in Hungary. When you take a population where back when I was there in 1985, 2/3 of the people wanted political pluralism, wanted tolerance, wanted religious freedom, right? And they were listening to those broadcasts, and it took all of a couple of years to get that number from 65% to 87%. And what happened when it hits 87%? At that point, the whole geopolitical position changes. At that point, people begin to transform that system. We are working, we're betting, we're compromising with the wrong faction. It should not be the clerics. It should not be the Ayatollah It should be the people. Those are the ones who represent the future there. And we have got to change this paradigm. And so that's where my efforts are going to be. If we do that, even with all the anarchy that emanates out of what's been let loose by these radical ideologies of, that are bent on jihad, we will be much better able to deal with this. And we should be dealing with the government in Egypt right now. We should not be pushing them away. We should not be reaching out to the Muslim Brotherhood. No. We should be backing al-Sisi's ideal of having the clerics learn and teach this concept of religious tolerance and pluralism. This is a struggle within a culture, and we are in danger of not being on the side of those who are resisting and fighting back. And we have such amazing resources to deploy in so many ways, such talent in the United States, such leverage in this, that I have not seen us use. And my goal is to have Republicans and Democrats come together in a way in which we can do that. That has to be our highest priority, because this is the greatest threat to instability around the world, this growing magnet that is this jihadist ideology.
Do you think that the paradigm of dealing with the Ayatollahs rather than with the majority of the people in Iran might disappear with the end of this administration?
I think it will succeed if Congress reasserts the role that we have in policy on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Committee, and passes the legislation which will implement these tools. And so I would frankly say we should start with the legislation that's in the Senate right now. And my goal is to get that to the President's desk with wide bipartisan support, just as we passed it through the House, so we can get it enacted into law. But thank you all very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, sorry as we are to lose the congressman, we're now going to hear from Steve Greenberg.
So let me bring a little bit of sunlight into what otherwise looks like a pretty dour picture. The last time Kenny put this group together, and many of you were here last August, we were talking about then the so-called Iran legislation and where people were and where they weren't. I just want to tell you a few things. After that, obviously, we had what we had, and all 53 of our members, no dissension in the Jewish community, signed on to make sure that going forward, we were together to make sure this agreement is an agreement that makes sense. But more importantly, we've been talking about Iran, we've been talking about our absence, we've been talking about the Russian presence. There is some good that has come out of that, I believe, and you heard what the congressman said about President Sisi. So Richard and Malcolm and I, beginning in January, took a trip with some Greek Americans, and we first took them to Israel, where we met with the Prime Minister and all the usual suspects, and then we went with them to Cyprus and Greece. And what was then being formed, it was something called the Eastern Mediterranean Initiative, and it was basically a tripartite agreement among those three countries to stop talking about the Middle East and put a focus on cooperating on everything between on the one hand, security, on the other hand, perhaps tourism, and everything going on in between. The fact the president of Cyprus had a phone dedicated just to the Prime Minister of Israel. After that, we had meetings in Turkey with Erdogan, and most importantly, we had a meeting with President Sisi, which was alluded to. And to say that it was a meeting that gave us hope about a relationship that some of us never thought could exist between Egypt and Israel, it gave us the feeling that there is a possibility that what was referred to as the Sisi plan may just do something. We've also heard from the Saudis, we've heard from the Jordanians.
So describe meeting with Sisi. Like
first, they only wanted to meet. Yeah, we were with him in the palace. It was first only Malcolm and myself, but then he agreed to see our entire delegation, which was very unusual, very unusual. I would say we spent 2 hours with him. The kinds of things he said to us were that we are joined together on the border. We fly together.
He means
Israel. I'm talking Israel and Egypt. Yeah. He said that but for the security relationship between Egypt and Israel, there would have been a multiple of terrorist attacks in Western Europe. He basically said that because they together were able to provide security to the Western European folks, that helped them negate possible attacks. So what I'm trying to say to you is, and by the way, this resulted because of the feeling of this movement towards Iran, our absence, Putin's presence. They're now moving toward Israel because they see Israel as the possible place where they can get the kind of help that they need to fight their issues. So what I'm just trying to indicate is, while everything Malcolm said is absolutely correct, that while the circumstances are dire, there is a possibility that something interesting and good will come out of all this.
I wanted to pose a question to the panel, suggested by some of the comments, and talk about a place called Russia. Russian tanks have recently entered Syria. Russia is very active in what's going on in the Middle East. And my question is, do we or should we react and consider Russia as an enemy of the United States, or possibly as an adversary, maybe having different objectives, but where we can deal with Russians on a basis of confidence and friendship? Obama started out to try to sweeten up the relationship. It did not work.
Kenny, the question is...
My own concern is Russia ought to be an ally and friend, an adversary but not an enemy, and I'd like the comments of the panel on that subject.
Go for it, Malcolm.
I think this is a very critical issue. Putin is eating our lunch. He's taking advantage of every vacuum that's created. If you notice the last weeks, Erdogan went there, Rouhani went there, Aliyev went there, Sisi went there, Bibi Netanyahu calls him. Every leader in the region is not coming to Washington, they're going to Moscow. If you look at the picture of Aliyev, Rouhani, and Putin, and announcing new plans for Central Asia, including a Northwest Corridor, they're going to build a railroad that will go from the heart of Russia through Azerbaijan, into Iran to the Persian Gulf, giving Russia a warm outlet. They are today in a broader position than they've been since primarily the Second World War, having the base in Syria, which is their initial interest. They've invested 10% of what we have in Syria, and who controls the situation there? They sold 10 times more than they have invested in Syria in new weapon sales because of their involvement. And we meet Muslim leaders, and all of them say to us, you're forcing us into their hands. And what he said about the broadcast is one factor, but our policies are to alienate people who are potential allies, and they turned to Russia and they said, you're forcing us into their arms, but they at least stand by their friends. And I think that if you look at the geopolitical situation, it should be the reverse. Russia's economy is the size of Italy. This is all built on a fiction. And he just takes advantage of the absence of the West. And you look at all of the circumstances that we look at, who's missing from that picture? I'll let you, and I just want to say something about Steve's comment. I don't think the situation is dire at all, because all the things we're talking about are not threats to Israel. Israel is in the best position it's been in many years, because you don't have an existential threat to Israel. Syria today is too occupied. Egypt is a friend. Jordan is a potential problem, but it's never going to be an existential danger. We have today a realignment in the Middle East, and the Eastern Mediterranean Initiative, which we initiated 5-6 years ago, has now Romania, Bulgaria, Tunisia, Malta, Italy, Spain, and Erdogan said to us he wants to be in it. And we told him the conditions.
And African countries too,
forget
right?
it. And I was going to say, second, look at the African countries. They call us every week. Muslim African countries begging to get us into Israel. Having the Prime Minister visit, getting them invitations. 8 of them hosted him just recently. 50,000 seats are being added to flights from China this year. 30,000 from India. This is isolation? Is Israel on the downswing, or is Israel all of a sudden people recognizing? Look how many companies China is buying in Israel, let alone American companies. Look at all the cooperation that's going on, and you can go literally around the globe and see today the change that has taken place. It is not a guarantee, and Israel has to be on alert. Israel faces real dangers from Hezbollah, Hamas, but all of it traces back to one problem. And if we had stood up, the people of Iran today want us. They went into the streets in the hundreds of thousands yelling, we will not die for Hamas, we will not die for Hezbollah, we will die for Iran. And our Secretary of State got up and said, we won't get involved in family feuds. And earlier, a Republican Secretary of State, when hundreds of thousands were in the streets demonstrating Green Revolution, Yellow Revolution, said, we don't get involved. And they broadcast it every 15 minutes. We are in touch all the time with the students, the young people, the unions in Iran. Today, half the university classes are empty. Kids can't go to college. And when they go in the burqas and they get there and they throw it off and they're wearing American jeans and listening to American music. They're looking to us and we abandon them. We could have changed the situation in Iran over the years. Nobody wants a military war. And on that note, we did not lose the battle over the Iran legislation, as many purported, and the media tried to slam the pro-Israel lobby and pro-Jewish and anti. The vote was 58-42 in the Senate against it. We needed 60 votes, but it was 58-42. That's not a loss. The loss is to America, to American security, to the world security, because we did not put the conditions and enforce them.
So our friend Steve over here said that they just, all three of these tigers just met with Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, who, as you probably know, the UN diplomats talk about nothing else. If you go to dinner with them, the big conversation piece is who's going to be the next Secretary General of the UN. Now, it was supposed to be a woman from Eastern Europe, but apparently it's really not working out because there were two Bulgarian women. The US liked one, but the Bulgarian government really likes another. And the Russians like the one that the Bulgarian government likes. So basically, she's done, because basically the UN Secretary General is selected by the US and Moscow, although no one would ever admit that. And so, but they're interviewed, of course. These people are interviewed by everyone at the UN. Every ambassador is interviewing these people up the wazoo 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So there's a Portuguese guy that's now in the lead. And the women are losing out, all the women. It was supposed to be the year of the woman. So all the women, even from South America, there's an Argentinian woman. She was supposed to be leading for a while. So anyway, the trio here met with Ban Ki-moon, the current Secretary General, to ask, is there any way that they could change the pervasive anti-Semitism at the UN? And Ban Ki-moon said,
we specifically asked him to appoint a special envoy and give this individual a title like Undersecretary for Anti-Semitism.
That's interesting.
And that's a request that was made. I don't think it was a successful request. He basically said, you know, while I personally feel the way I do, I'm not sure anything is going to happen. But the issue of anti-Semitism, I also wanted to say, the conference is circulating a petition. All 53 of our members have signed on. It's gone to the Secretary General. It's gone beyond that. And the concept is to get, hopefully, all of you in this audience and the entire Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community to focus on the bias that goes on at the United Nations against Israel. And this is a very important project for us at the conference this year. So that's why when you showed this question about anti-Semitism at the UN, I kind of urged you to let us answer it. So I don't know if Kenny or Richard or Malcolm want to add to that.
People should know this effort by UNESCO, just for a thing, because I think it's the most critical development on a fundamental level, where they have removed all of the Judeo-Christian names from every holy site in Jerusalem and now in Hebron and elsewhere, where the wall, the Western Wall, is no longer called the Western Wall in UN documents. It's called Abu Rak's Wall, which was the name of Muhammad's horse, who ascended after him, one under the other, after he died. Even though Muhammad never visited Israel in his lifetime, that Rachel's tomb, for 3,000 years, called Kutab Rachel, is now a mosque named for Muhammad's driver, that the Cave of the Patriarchs is only a mosque, that the Western Wall Plaza and Harim al-Sharif, no more are the Judeo-Christian names. 3,800 years of Jewish history wiped out. First they hyphenated it, and then they removed the hyphenated parts. And now they're expanding it even to Christian sites. The current resolution will be on Jerusalem and its environs. So this is really critical, because they understand better than us. If you take away our past, you take away our future. That's why he won't recognize a Jewish state. That's why they are fighting on this battle to deny the existence of the temples, which you'd say is crazy with all the problems they have. But it goes fundamentally to the existence of the state. And on the question of the UN, the question about the future of the UN, whether it can uphold any principle, is really at stake in this. And so far, they have failed to demonstrate that kind of commitment. And that worries us a lot, and we work at it. We've met with almost all the candidates for Secretary General, almost all of them. We did not yet meet with Guterres, but we will. And when they meet with us, they're all so pro-Israel. Every one of them starts off being pro-Israel, and then they fall into the machine, which is so viciously anti-Israel, that even people who are decent get maligned and become a part of the anti-Israel machinery.
I don't think you can emphasize enough how incredible it is at the UN when you consider, for example, that Israel is viewed consistently as the greatest oppressor of women in the world. And what are there, tens of millions of 12-year-old Muslim women, Muslim girls who are mutilated deliberately every year. They're not allowed to do this, and they're forced to dress this way and that way. They're beaten without sanctions, et cetera, and Israel is the greatest oppressor. It's a lie so great that you have nothing to grasp onto to refute it, and I think it's incredibly important to understand that before you can deal with it.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for your brilliant comments, all three of you.
All of us thank Lally, who's the best at this. Kept us from all getting out of hand and made it really work.
I have never been at a panel, and I've been at a lot of panels, where there were more horses' mouths. That is, people who knew what they were saying, knew what they're talking about. I hope that some of the things that were said here today planted a seed in some of you to become active and work for the betterment of the community, of the Jewish community, of the American community, of the world community. And with that, I'd like to thank Rabbi Zimmerman again.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.